Thank you, Stephen. Rick Carney from Business SA. As Michael Barber knows, he and I are very much in agreement around his comments about much greater collaboration between business and universities to get innovation, and also that the culture within universities in regards to research needs to change. What I'm interested in from the other panellists is, do you agree with Michael's comments? And if not, why not? And if you don't agree, I'm happy to have a private conversation with you.
Can I just have because that's an important and I appreciate agreement, but you left half the story out. I don't think all the culture change needs to be on our side of the fence. I think that's an important part of the dialogue. Now I'll let my colleagues shoot me down or agree.
Sounded like an invitation to step outside. You'll be interested to know that the three of us met for an hour just before this session to discuss exactly that question about what to put to the Premier in a coordinated way of ways in which we might assist government in promoting commercialisation of our research with industry, and this is something we are really very serious about.
I don't disagree with you.
If I could just elaborate without imposing on you all, not being a South Australian myself. I think the point, though, that Michael then supplemented the questioner here on is about the role of industry too. And I do think you're absolutely dead right. Universities have to get a whole lot better at this. And I think it's fair to say I did a National Press Club address earlier this year, and one of the things that we announced on that particular occasion was a new agreement, an MOU with BCI, AIG, and ACCI as well. We're trying to work at many levels. Each institution in this room and around the country would tell you all of the good things they do with industry, and there are wonderful things that people do with industry. So the reality is there is a lot of work going on here, but recognise that we can always do better. What I do is I think about a conversation that I had with an engineering graduate of my own university, absolutely first class, woman engineering graduate, superb. She went out to work with industry for a while. She was fundamentally disappointed because she said to me when, as part of that experience, that people wanted her to be an engineer of 30 years ago or 20 years ago when that manager had emerged from their own program. Now, she decided she'd give industry away for a little bit, and she went and got a Rhodes Scholarship and went off and did other things, which was probably a good thing for her to do. But I do think that this is a two-way street, and I'm not trying to deflect any criticism from universities there. I'm just saying that we've got to have a really very much a grounded and, I think, mutually beneficial partnership on this.
Please.
Marty Govan from Tier 5. I've had occasion over the last few years to be involved in various reviews of National Innovation System and different government programs and so forth, and I guess what I see is that the thinking in Canberra is driven by a class of expertise that none of you are members of, thankfully, and that's economists. So you are, it seems to me, arguing passionately from your own corner, but that the economist's view, for example, would be that income contingent loans are the best way to deliver a disproportionate benefit to an individual, kind of full stop, end of story, and that in order to provide that system in an uncapped way, then it should be delivered at the government's cost of money, that being the 10-year bond rate. So I don't actually agree with those things. I'm not an economist either, but I'd be interested in how you would refute that.
I think the question there is a really good answer. And in a sense, the proponent of that scheme, Bruce Chapman, has, I think, articulated the complexity of that as part of public policy. There is good economics in it, but equally well, it's a social program. So the repressivity, or the regressiveness, rather, of the changes are a significant factor that comes through. Secondly, and this is quite interesting, in the UK, there is probably more recognition than in Australia of one of the contributions of the public purse is to the sustainability of the HEC scheme and the fee help. Because in a sense, this is in fact a real debt as an off-balance sheet item, speaking as an economist language, on the national accounts. In the UK, they seem to more to my perception, and people may wish to comment differently, more explicitly recognise that as part of the broader public good argument. So you're right, Marty, it is an economic argument, and in fact part of the genius of Chapman was to argue for that sort of income contingent loan in an economic view. But the social imperatives of it as a piece of broader public policy should not actually be ignored.
And you can add to that the fact that Australia does have a taxation system whereby the higher you earn, the more you pay, and that's often graduates. We also know that there is a substantial public benefit as a result of there being graduates too. So the Universities Australia submission to the Senate committee actually articulates precisely why it is that we can't just get lost on the public return, on the private return on this, but indeed there is a strong economic reasons, well-grounded economic reasons, multi-factor productivity reasons, which we have in our paper, which go to show that at the end of the day there is a substantial public benefit here that ought to be recognised as well.
I just add one final point to that we're not arguing about the actual method of repayment. I think the HEX piece is fine. It doesn't impact on the income of the institutions one bit. We've been standing here talking about the fact that it's going to impact on the students, and by impacting on the students, it's going to pass into the wider economic sphere.
Can I ask one provocative question of business? What intrigues me about the HEX scheme is why government support for business, or business welfare if you want to be a little more cynical, isn't actually somehow also made conditional you pay it back as part of your profits that come from it. So I think there are a number of ways you could cut that cake.
Please. Greg Parkinson from Exchanging. In much the same way that the GFC drove business to look at efficiencies and productivity, obviously the funding cuts that are coming through are driving the same changes in the higher education sector. Where does that efficiency focus come in terms of the other priorities that the universities are looking at and other initiatives they're looking at?
You want to field that? I'll stick my neck out. Almost no other industry that had, over the last, as Sandra referred to, had built off its own back, basically, a $15 billion export industry as the higher education sector have done. If you want a single productivity measure, go and look at the staff-student ratio that has gone up over the last 10 or 15 years. If that's not a productivity increase, then we're teaching more students and broadly saying, and maybe this is where we've actually gone wrong, because we've managed to produce graduates, for the most part, business likes. They still get into international graduate schools. We've managed to maintain quality, perhaps not as much as all of us would like, but it's still up there. And I think very few other sectors of the economy would actually argue that productivity case.
Yeah, I think the short answer, Greg, is it's pretty high up on the list. You're looking at, in the absence of what's proposed now, I mean, the efficiency dividend last year took a huge amount of money out of circulation in the system, and we're still trying to deliver the same product with increased quality with lower revenue. And so it is, every day we get up and we think about how can we keep the show on the road with less.
Yes, because the labour is the largest part of our costs, the continual attempt to cut costs does affect the staff-student ratio. Now, a huge part of what we contribute to South Australia is the international students that we bring here. You need to understand that in Asia, where Australia and the UK were dominant, the Americans are now there recruiting in the same market, and they didn't go through the massification of education that we did. There are major universities there recruiting students where they can offer classes where 70% of their classes are under 20 in the class. Many of the Australian institutions are offering an experience with lecture theatres of 500, 800, 1,000, 1,500 students. Now, can we do better than that? Well, okay, yes, we can have 2,500, but the internationals are going to stop coming. Now, we just need to be careful if we're going to stay in this business 5 years from now. 30% of international students from Australia now go home saying the experience they had was satisfactory. And a significant part of that is a great many of them never met a lecturer. Now, we can't go on like this. We have to have price as a lever so that we can get back to a quality experience and compete with the Americans who are going to be in Asia taking our business, to put it crudely.
I wonder if I might just pick up that question about quality. In the Australian context, as we currently have it, without the proposals for increased competition with non-doctoral providing institutions now being given an opportunity to offer undergraduate degrees, do any of you have any concerns about potentially what that might mean in terms of quality going forward? And I know we're talking the language of deregulation, but experience seems to tell me in the past when there were some issues around institutions perhaps that were started with lower fees and so on and so forth, that they hit the wall and there was a need then to regulate some of the issues associated with those. Collectively on the panel, do you have some questions, some concerns, or do you think that in the broader scheme of competition, where we might see lower prices being offered to students to do particular qualifications, albeit they won't be from one of your institutions, which is doctoral awarding institutions, and therefore one would think in the broad scheme of things would have perhaps more prestige associated with it. Is that going to be a problem? Sandra, perhaps from your perspective.
Look, just to let you know, let's understand that there are already degree-granting institutions that aren't doctoral degree-granting institutions, but there already are some in this country that aren't universities. And those institutions are subject to regulation. We've had, as far as VET is concerned in Victoria a few years ago, some terrible circumstances that occurred there, which meant that there were dodgy providers, regulation wasn't up to scratch, students were damaged, our international reputation was damaged, it was all pretty disastrous. And I'd like to imagine that we learned from those experiences. It wasn't in the university sector, it was in the VET sector, and I do believe that that has been set to rights pretty much. My key response to this is that it goes to regulation. So TEQSA, the Tertiary Education Quality and Standards Agency, is the regulator for higher education in this country. And it's had its own little ups and downs, and the government, this current government, when it came in, wanted to reshape parts of the way in which that operated and who was involved in that. For me, a properly resourced and a well-run TEQSA is going to be absolutely critical, because that is going to be protecting brand Australia, and we need to make sure that that happens. Now, the challenge for us is that the government, in some of the changes, have been looking to reduce the funding of that agency. Indeed, to be fair, also introducing the scope of that agency. But I don't believe there would be a Vice Chancellor in the country, and nor, to be fair, to private education providers in this country. You know, it's in everybody's best interest that brand Australia is protected, and we need to make sure that the quality standards are maintained strongly, unequivocally, and without any compromise at any stage.
Anyone disagree?
I don't disagree. I think South Australia is in a happier position in relation to this. This has been one of the great criticisms of these reforms, that it opens the whole sector up in an unregulated way to dodgy operators, and certainly in the eastern states we know there's been some terrible examples of colleges of hairdressing and colleges of hospitality where essentially the entrance requirement is that you're horizontal and breathing and you've got a few dollars sticking out of one pocket. In Australia, the three significant non-public operators are University College London, Carnegie Mellon and Torrens, and it's a bit hard to accuse them of being dodgy operators. And I think for South Australia, deregulation will enlarge the array of choice for students. It will draw more of those institutions into the public subsidy and into the HECS scheme, and will be to the benefit of those wanting education.
While, as Sandra said, there is a significant number of private providers for higher education in Australia, the extension to them of the Commonwealth subsidy does, I think, raise some new risks for the sector and risks for Australia's reputation. And as many of you would know from your own sectors, finding the right balance between regulation and that in fact protects and doesn't, of course, coming from us sounds very much like hold back the tide of change, yet to be honest, We have seen enough failures of regulation in this country and around the world to at least tread very cautiously to a field in which providers would get Commonwealth subsidy, no necessary commitment to making contributions to that, notwithstanding the needs to jump through some hoops. And then, of course, the question, does the regulator have enough capacity to essentially deal with quite a significant thing? I'm well aware those are questions which certainly UA have been arguing, and I think many of us need to recognise, and that's an area where perhaps going a little slower than perhaps is envisaged would, in think, be valuable for everybody.
Yeah, I'll just make one closing comment on this, that we have to be very careful about the terminology here. Deregulation is not the abdication of quality control. Deregulation pertains to the ability to charge fees. Now, what we're doing in reform is bringing other providers into the same net of quality control that we actually operate in already. And if that net of quality control is maintained, then the system can expand in a quality regulated fashion within a deregulated fee backdrop.
Provided resources are with TESCA to do the job that is expected of you all. One final question I think we had. Here, thank you.
Paul Willis, Director at RIOS. First of all, I'd like to thank you guys for a really interesting discussion. So far, we've concentrated largely on immediate issues and how to deal with them. And I'd just like to hear the vision thing. Where are your institutions going and the sector as a whole going? Where would you like it to go? What role does it have to offer in the future of the economy and the society? And most importantly, how do you think we're going to get there?
Do it in a tweet.
Let's flip the ball down to our esteemed chair. The last word from the panel.
Look, I'll make just some opening remarks here. It's such a big question. We could have, 3 or 4 hours or more on that, and I think it really demands some red wine. I think some good red wine, that sort of question. Look, I think that we should have great expectations about the future of higher education research in this country, because we know how fundamentally important that is in a globally competitive environment. And we know that as a nation, we're going through structural reform and structural adjustment in terms of our own economy, and I do border on economics in terms of my own background. And we know what we need. What we need is more innovation, we need more highly skilled and we need more population actually too, but that gets into somewhere else. But we need more highly skilled, labour force, quite frankly, and we need to do that. And I think the really great news is that we've got this strong base, this strong higher education and research system that can platform that. And what we're talking about here, and I always worry that higher education people, like any industry, we tend to speak in tongues because we know it all so well. And I don't want to have you leaving this room feeling that it is all doom and gloom, because I do think we need to acknowledge that we've got an extremely high quality, diverse, globally recognised system that has indeed driven that level of export earnings for Australia, which has been the third largest export industry in the country, has been driven by education. And we've got to understand that we're in a fine position to move from here, to build further strength from here, to understand what that economy to come is going to require, and indeed to deliver that. So I'm actually very, very upbeat about what's going to happen. I do think we've got some waters to sail through where we try to get those policy settings as right as possible. They won't be perfect, but as right as possible, that can help us platform that economy to come and that sector to come.
David?
I think if I put a dampener on it in terms of the implications for students, I didn't mean to do that. I think what needs to be reaffirmed here is how important a sector the university higher education sector is. In the over 50s club, you have 8 of the world's top universities in the top 100 sitting in Australia. In the under 50s club, you have 10. So that is nearly half the sector in that upper echelon of excellence as internationally ranked here. And that can't be underestimated. When you go back to the original remarks that Sandra made about the quantum of funding that we put into the system to drive that output, we get a huge bang for our buck. And we sit here agonising over changes about the transfer of cost envelopes. The envelope is insufficient to sustain quality for the future. We need to make sure that we don't expand it at a rate which defers entry for students for the future. And we can get that balance right, but it requires us and government to behave responsibly and actually plan out to the longer term to sustain what is an exceptionally productive and internationally exceptionally good sector.
Michael?
I'm actually someone that probably has a view that we're less likely to see the radical changes people say. 50 years ago, to declare my age, I was sitting for my final exams as a high school student in the university in Sydney, about in the following February to enter the University of New South Wales. At that time, it was just the time when I was still, as Warren said, would have been Commonwealth Scholarship. I took my first job in a university in 1974, at the time that Whitlam announced that there was free education. The Vice Chancellor of the day, whose name I don't actually remember, but I do remember what he said: "You'll regret the day you have a single paymaster," because you could play up. I've been through all of the transformations of the last 50 years in one way or another in higher education, and I don't think any one of them was quite as dramatic as they were. I actually, with due respect to Warren's view, do not think the American system is what Australia needs. I do not think the Scandinavian system is what we need, but I do think there are aspects of the Scandinavian system we should do. Australia needs an Australian higher education system, as Sandra said, that serves the nation, positions us globally, and in fact allows us to compete very competitively in the burgeoning East Asian economies of the 21st century. That takes everybody to come together. So my vision probably going forward 10 years, we will, I think, be perhaps not as dramatically different as we are today, but if we do it well, if we work with everybody, we will have helped build the Australian economy that all of us needs. As you know, the new vision for South Australia is a place where people and business thrive, and that means we do need a higher education system, employing people, teaching people, helping the economy grow, the state thrive.
Warren?
Well, it's good to hear something Michael and I disagree about. As Sandra said early on, it's difficult to remember a time when there's been so much uniformity about an issue as there is over this one between Vice Chancellors. I think, Paul, in my remarks earlier, I touched a bit on what I think would happen, which is that the universities, there would be more choice for the public. The three universities here would grow more different from one another. The certain things would be done by one that weren't being done by another, possibly at a different price. Some of the duplications might disappear. I think it would be a very vibrant and interesting environment for South Australian students planning higher education. The trouble with all of this is, as you've had a sense, I'm sure, is it's very, very complicated. I mean, the package has so many aspects to it. It's very difficult to get your head across all of them. My wife is in the law, and she says to me, "I'm an intelligent person and I don't know what you're talking about." And I think there is a problem. And if you think it's a problem for you and for us, imagine what it's like for those senators who have so many other issues to think about. And this matter we're discussing today is very, very fragile at this moment. It comes down to the three Palmer United Party senators in the end who will determine this. How we got to this point where members of a splinter party would determine such a major issue is something we could probably talk about at great length. And some of them, have not got their head around it. As you know, Senator Lambie's trying to come to terms with Sharia law at the moment. So goodness knows where she is with this reform. But all of us have spent time with the Palmer United Party senators and their staff, and one thing I've learned is that the word united is the wrong one to apply to that party. So it's very unclear what's going to happen, and this is on a knife edge. But as I said in my presentation, I think this is a once-in-a-30-year moment. If this is defeated, I don't believe we'll see deregulation put up again by either party for a very long time, certainly not in my career.
Yes, it's my great privilege to say thank you to our guest speakers in the panel today. I don't know about you, but I have certainly found it to be a fascinating set of insights into an incredibly important topic for our state and for our nation. So I'd also like to say thank you to Stephen and to Hamilton and the CEDA team for putting this on today, and thank you to the audience for your own participation in today's event. I hope you've all taken something away from this, and while you're silent today while listening, you've learnt something you can take away and be noisy and contribute to the debate going forward. Clearly an important topic. So thank you all for your contributions. They're greatly appreciated.